Excellent. So while we get few more people in the waiting list and in the lobby in the event, let me open this session and this very important workshop. My name is Martino Miraglia, and I will be the facilitator of the workshop today. Welcome, first of all, to the launch of the multi-level governance for SDG localization global research. This research at this event follows the event that was organized already during HLPF, where many of our partner countries and all the knowledge partners that are parts of this process participated already, you might remember. This event does not only coincide with the launch of the research, but with the opening also of a new work stream within UN Habitat focused on multi-level governance in support of the agency's work and, of course, of the partners' work on SDG localization. Today is a good day. We have a very good panel of partners. This is really the result of months of work, not only from the project team, but also from all the partners that have been involved in sharing their experiences, practices from the countries and the cities, but also the knowledge partners that have put their expertise and time at the disposal of this project. So I am personally very happy to be here and grateful for not only the participants connected, but all of the partners that have been involved in this process. The event structure and agenda is rather simple today. We really want to have a discussion between all the partners that have been taking part to this process, and plus we are going to have also the pleasure to hear more from the researchers and all the knowledge partners that have been involved in the development of the research about the findings and recommendations of this process. I will introduce a bit also this work stream and what comes next. So a bit of an overview of what is expected for the exciting 2023 and 2024. Before anything happens, please just a couple of housekeeping information. Only speakers and presenters have the possibility to open their cameras and mics. Please, let's use the chat to raise the question and answer. We will try to find a moment, probably at the end of the opening or after the presentation of the research, to open the floor for questions, of course, depending on time availability. We will please put your questions in the chat and we will try to take them all together at the end of the session. The session is being recorded, and we might take some screenshots. So just for communication, I hope this is fine for you. Unless if you're not fine with it, please let us know in the chat so that we'll make sure that you are not appearing somehow. If we are all ready, I will open the floor to our opening speakers. We have 4 colleagues that will deliver some institutional remarks on behalf both of the institutions as well as the countries that have been part of this initial process. First and foremost, let me give the floor to Dr. Shipra Naransuri, the Chief of the Urban Practices Branch in UN Habitat. Shipra, over to you.
Thanks, Martino. Good afternoon, good morning to those from Latin America, and a good evening to those in Asia. It's fantastic to see so many people in this meeting, and I'm told there were some 400, 500 registrations, and I was thinking, wow, we must have started something good here. And there must be a demand for this work. That's why we have so many people who are interested. So a very warm welcome to the launch of our research and our new work stream, as Martino was saying, on multi-level governance for SDG localization. Indeed, this theme, this topic, is making significant strides around the world in the context of the discussion around the SDGs. And I'm very honored to have a chance to say a few words and welcome you all. Before I start with some of my substantive comments, a very big thanks to our partners. First of all, the GIZ and the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, for their support to this work and for their partnership. This is really a cornerstone in our cooperation, and I hope that it will lead to many more joint projects in the future. Also, a very big thanks to all the countries and cities, the pilots that have contributed with their experiences to shape the content of this research. Argentina, Ghana, Italy, Jordan, and the Philippines. There's a reason why you're called pilots. You really paved the way. Thank you for your time, your availability. This work would not be possible without you. And I'm sure that many countries from all around the globe will have lots to learn from you and from the practices that you have shared. And of course, a huge thanks to the partners that have given generously their knowledge and their expertise to make this research worthwhile and possible. ARCO, who are the leaders of this research and increasingly our go-to partner for action research, UCLG, United Cities and Local Governments, our partner in crime for many decades on advancing decentralization, local governance, urban governance agendas, the Brookings Institution, LSE Cities, Philip, good to see you, and the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance. And I would be very remiss if I didn't say at least one line in thanks to my own team, Martino, Telman, Claudia, Gaia, Marta, and many of you who spend hours behind the scenes to make this happen. We are very proud of both this partnership and its outcome. The journey is as important as the destination for us. I think this has been a process whereby we have joined hands and we can now just go from strength to strength in positioning multi-level governance in the global debate. No one single entity can do this alone, as well as provide joint technical support to us country and city partners. Again, no one entity can do it alone. There is too much to do and there is not enough time. And of course, it's very inspiring, as I said at the beginning, to see how many people are interested in this work and have joined this session. To me, that is a signal. It demonstrates that multi-level governance is a central element for an inclusive and sustainable future. Colleagues, allow me to share with you three key aspects that emphasize why enabling multi-level governance ecosystems is crucial for the fulfillment of global development agendas, how this is being done at the global level, and the pathway. What are the major milestones upcoming in 2023 and 2024 to take this conversation forward? First of all, multi-level governance is being recognized as key to achieving the SDGs and for strengthening local and national capacities to deliver sustainable development. But this was not always so. This has come up and has come to the forefront of the discussion also in a world that faces interconnected crises and where local and regional governments have once again proved themselves to be key actors in mitigating the consequences of these crises. We know now, we knew, some of us knew a long time ago, but I think more and more national governments, more and more international actors know now that local governments are central in fostering a sustainable, just, and inclusive recovery from these multiple crises, grounded in the concept of caring for each other and caring for the planet. But we also know that local governments cannot do this alone. Fragmented governance structures often leave local and regional governments operating in a vacuum, independently, without adequate means or capacities to align their policies with other levels, and even less to implement them. For many years, the debate has been about decentralization. And for many years, and I think we can say this in this room, for many years, this debate has been stalled. Multi-level governance has really opened up the opportunity to reignite that discussion. We know now, national governments recognize now that the transformation that needs to be brought to achieve the global agendas will only occur if local action is placed at the center of, at the heart of sustainable development and of development cooperation. If the needs of local communities and priorities of local communities are set right in that space rather than being an afterthought. For UN Habitat, this whole process of SDG localization, the embrace and the transmission of SDGs to the local level is absolutely vital for the achievement of the 2030 agenda. And to propel our societies towards recovery from COVID, from the climate crisis, and from many crises that we are facing. But neither local nor national governments can do this alone, can act alone. Achieving the SDGs in the very short time window that we have is only possible if healthy and effective multi-level governance systems are in place. Multi-level governance for us provides the lens to design policies and initiatives anchored on effective resource allocation and on the alignment of plans, policies, and strategies. And finally, on enhanced delivery capacities at all levels. It has to be a dynamic process. It's not a one-way street. It's open-ended with both top-down and bottom-up, a two-way interaction. By empowering local and national governments and local stakeholders, national governments will be able to enhance their implementation capacities to transform policies and strategies into action. On the other hand, by grounding national development and recovery strategies on communities' needs and priorities, governments will also be able to better address the consequences of the current crisis and plan better for long-term development. National enabling frameworks that facilitate multi-level coordination, policy coherence, and redistribution of resources are therefore key to succeed in the implementation of the SDGs. Let me now come to the how. How are we doing this? How are we advancing this discussion in global processes and debates? Remember that we do have Goal 17 from the beginning in the SDGs. There's a bit of a latecomer to national governments' recognition, but the goal around partnerships recognizes within its targets the central role of multi-level governance, as well as policy alignment to achieve the goals and implement the 2030 agenda. In more recent times, we have seen a reaffirmation of the Goal 17 in various documents of the United Nations. The Secretary General's report titled Our Common Agenda, it talks about the importance of renewing the social contract between governments and their people. It also acknowledges the need to overcome fragmentation to ensure we are all working towards the same goal, a common goal. And then we had in April 22, this year in April, the high-level meeting on the implementation of the new urban agenda, where some 90+ member states subscribed to speak. Some of them could, others couldn't, but they submitted written statements. And one of the common themes, that's emerging, 6 themes emerge, and one of those is multi-level governance and localization. This is coming from statements of national governments as much as statements of local governments in that. So I think the acknowledgement is very much there. The high-level political forum on sustainable development that takes place every year, the ministerial declaration from this year acknowledges the importance of inclusive governance, good governance, leadership, decision-making, coordination, coherence at all levels. And within the high-level political forum, we also have more and more emphasis on the coordination between national and local reporting on the SDGs, the connection between VLRs and VNRs. Many of you have been in many discussions where we've talked about this, and we're seeing the results. More and more national governments are mentioning local reviews in their VNRs. More and more national governments are bringing in local governments with them to the high-level political forum. Local and regional government involvement is rising from countries that produced a VNR in 2016. Only about 30% of the countries had any had any engagement with local governments, and that has risen to almost 50% of the countries that submitted a VNR. This is not a small achievement. This is not a small shift. And to advance this further, we're going to use the vehicle of the newly launched vehicle of the Local 2030 Coalition, which is a system-wide coalition to advance the localization of the 2030 agenda, which is UN Habitat holds the secretariat, but more importantly, it includes 14 agencies, funds and programs and offices of the UN, and has a very strong link with resident coordinator offices to give them the tools to advance localization and multi-level governance to localize the SDGs. These are all the different pathways. It's not one, but there are many different ways in which we are advancing this discussion. Let me now go to the sort of roadmap for 2023 and 24. These 2 years will be critical for our collective work on SDG localization and multi-level governance. 2023 is the midpoint in the implementation of the SDGs before the 2030 deadline. There will be a sequence of regional forums on sustainable urban development around about in the first quarter. They'll be organized by the regional economic commissions, and these are very important opportunities to take forward the discussion that we're launching today. In June, at UN Habitat, we will have the second session of the UN Habitat Assembly, again, where SDG localization will be one of the main pillars of discussion among member states, among partners, stakeholders. And this will be quickly followed by the high-level political forum in July in New York, which itself is laying the ground for the SDG summit that will gather heads of state for the second time since the endorsement of the 2030 agenda. So these are really important moments and milestones where the conversation goes ahead. And finally, into 2024, we will have the 12th edition of the World Urban Forum in Egypt in early 2024, which will be centered on the discussion of localization. And finally, we have the Summit of the Future, which is planned for later in 2024, where, of course, the whole discussion around inclusive multilateralism, the new social contract, and therefore multi-level governance is going to be taken forward. So we are hoping to build on the momentum of not only today, but this whole research and on the work of each and every one of you to take this conversation to the big forums, but also to spur action in different countries. We now have the practical examples. We now have the global knowledge to concretely advance effective multi-level governance systems. If someone comes to us and say, but where do I start? How do I do this? We're able to confidently say, look at these countries. See how they started the process. Look what they have done and look what they have achieved. So today is an important day. Today is a good day in many different ways. And this is a major milestone. I hope that we will be able to build on it collectively, each one of us, as well as all of us together, and take this leap of faith into the coming 2 years and in advancing the SDGs, the 2030 agenda, the new urban agenda, and eventually shaping the post-2030 agenda. That's where this is all going. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Shipra. Thank you very much for your wonderful remarks. I know that this is one of the last commitments that you have before the holiday breaks. I hope this is a good last commitment. Thanks a lot for your words indeed, and let me share also what I didn't do before. Greetings to all the partners, GIZ, ARCO, LSCCT, UCLG, the Nelson Mandela School, and of course Brookings, but also all the pilot countries, some of which are going to speak right after you, because this is really, as you mentioned, a collection of unique experiences that we hope will inspire other colleagues, other partners to follow some good practices and to strengthen that multi-level governance coordination that is absolutely needed to achieve the SDGs and to work beyond the SDGs themselves. Thank you, Shipra, again. I will give the floor to the first of our special guests from the pilot countries, Melissa Gorondi Novak, coordinator of the Sustainable Development Strategy within the General Directorate of Articulation and Institutional Affairs of the province of Córdoba. Melissa, we have been working together on from many different perspectives in the past few months. And we are more than grateful for your availability, and let me share ahead the congratulations for your work. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martino. Thank you very much, UN Habitat, and thank you, Shipra, for the inspiring words and all of your reflections. We were talking with Valentina also from the government of Córdoba in the chat, saying that we are very inspired with your reflections and everything you said. I will ask Valentina to share the presentation. I have only 2 slides to show a little bit about the experience of Córdoba. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, there. So I'm bringing the experience of the province of Córdoba, and this is located in Latin American region, specifically in one of the southernmost countries in the world, which is Argentina. And Córdoba is the second most populated province in the country, and is characterized as the most fragmented subnational government. We have more than 400 municipalities and communes. And this point is very important for us in regarding to the topic of multi-level governance. And since the beginning of the agenda, Córdoba has been working on building solid foundations that allowed the 2030 agenda to be institutionalized and practiced at the local level. For us, for Córdoba, the 2030 agenda has been given as a conceptual framework and a common language to provide specific and concrete answers and solutions to the problems that our citizens are facing every day. And it is very important because, as I said at the beginning, we are from a southern country in the world, and our challenges are mainly regarding to social problems. And in that sense, our projects and our work towards the 2030 agenda put focus on that issue, on solving the multi-dimensional poverty and inequalities that we live in southern countries, as in Argentina and in Córdoba. Vale, you can move to the next slide. We consider that there are 5 keys the experience of Córdoba is bringing to the world based on our work towards the 2030 agenda, but I will put focus specifically on multi-level governance. For us, multi-level governance implies recognizing, as Shipra said before, that there is a shared responsibility between all levels of government, and the importance of articulation with all the territorial actors also. And the work in pursuit of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development involves not only multi-level but also multi-stakeholder governance articulation. And this ensures for us a dialogue, strengthen exchange, and promote links so that the different actors and jurisdictional levels interact in a coordinated manner to achieve it. And the province of Córdoba believes that this path towards sustainable development could be collaborative and coordinated in 3 dimensions of articulation. In one hand, the vertical dimension. As I said, Córdoba is the most municipalized province in the country. We have more than 400 local levels, and in which these local levels, 4 of them are urban agglomerates, and they cover more than the 50% of the total population. And if we see the rest of them, 265 localities have less than 2,000 inhabitants each. So that's the main issue. That's the main area in which we have to work, and we are working nowadays. Also, the provincial government works to strengthen this coordination with local governments in a table, in a province municipality table, in which we coordinate and co-administrate specific and concrete actions that are mainly focused on social issues, such as health, such as housing, such as transportation. So this is a dialogue with local levels to consolidate the management model aimed at achieving sustainable development at the municipal level. But also there is a second dimension, which is the vertical governance dimension, and it necessarily implies working with the national level. And for this reason, the province has been working with the National Council for Coordination of Social Policies since 2017. Nowadays, I'm in another province of Argentina, which is La Rioja, and yesterday we have a meeting with all the local points from this National Council of Coordination to share our experiences and to finish this year after a year of coordination and exchanging experiences with the 25 provinces from Argentina. And finally, we also consider that this vertical coordination is not only within the country, but also with the international arena. So for us, this multi-level governance also implies the articulation with the international area, such as with United Nations, and as Martino said before, the work with UN Habitat and with also other agencies such as CEPAL from Argentina, from Latin America also, for us is very important. And in another hand, also we consider the horizontal dimension. In this case, as you know, or I'm saying those who don't know about it, Argentina is a federal country, so we are provinces that are autonomous, but the coordination with the provinces, for example, we consider this is a very important issue in the multi-level governance in Argentina. And Córdoba is part of one region, a central region with other two provinces, which is Santa Fe and Entre Rios. And with them, we are working, developing new policies, new projects for sustainable development in agendas such as gender, renewable energy, and international trade. And finally, with this multi-level governance, we highlight a third dimension, which we consider the synergy, that refers to working with stakeholder governance. It means to work with the private sector, with the academia, and social organizations. We consider they are key for our sustainable development model, and they're not only part of the discussions in the government, but they are also working towards the implementation and the continuity of policies. We are very grateful and we want to thank you. Sorry for my voice. I was like screaming yesterday with the football match, but I wanted to be here in this important scenario. And we are also very grateful for UN Habitat for inviting us to share our experience. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Melissa. Indeed, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for taking the time while being on mission, coordinating with the other provinces. So this is a live proof of your commitment and the work of the province of Córdoba. Really, I think that the work of Córdoba within the context of Argentina, specifically in the Latin American context, is something to look very much forward to, and I'm pretty sure that has already inspired many other practices, both in the region as well as country and as well as worldwide. So thanks a lot, Melissa. I know that we will continue this discussion very soon. Now let me give the floor to Patience Ampoma, planning analyst and SDG coordinator and focal point for the African Union Agenda and WASH within the National Development and Planning Commission of Ghana. Patience, over to you for your institutional remarks, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Apologies on behalf of the National Coordinator for the SDG and Agenda 23, Dr. Richard Buffer. He had to quickly address an emergency, and I'm here in his stead. So once again, we are grateful as in Ghana and the National Development Planning Commission, which is the apex planning body in the nation, and we coordinate the implementation implementation of the SDG and that of the AU Agenda 2063. So we got a call from Shipra and the team, and we're very happy actually to be part of this research. First and foremost, because there's a lot that Ghana has been doing when it comes to the SDG implementation, particularly in establishing a very enviable, I would say, architecture for the implementation of the SDG. With our planning process, we take it through a particular system where it is decentralized in nature. So as much as possible, any interventions that happen at the national level, we ensure that it is also trickled down at the decentralized level. So that is what we have been doing so far since the inception of the SDG and its implementation. We've actually established more of a three-tier coordinating committee. The apex has to do with the ministerial committee that give approval and accent to any implementation deliverable. And then we have the implementation coordinating committee, which is also housed at NDPC, where we chair the various processes with relevant institutions to ensure that whatever is being discussed with regards to data generation, it is done in a very cordial manner. And lastly, we also have the implementation coordinating committee, which is at the NGO, at the ministry, department, and agencies, and most importantly, at the local level. But for some time now, we've not been able to be quite effective at the local level. But over time, we realized that there is still demand at the local level to be heard when it comes to the SDGs. So presently, we are working on expanding voluntary local review from one city in Accra, which is Accra Metropolitan Municipal Assembly, which is the first assembly to actually prepare a voluntary local review. And now we are expanding it to many more municipal assembly or district assemblies at the local level to also join in and provide their own story, not necessarily the national story of how far we are going as a nation, but also providing the opportunity for the local level to also showcase what they are doing, showcase their level of prowess when it comes to the SDG data generation, how they are fixing various gaps in data and how they are implementing the SDG issues of interventions such as local economic development, which is very, very important for the local level to actually enter into the market of entrepreneurship and development and socio-economic issues, all are actually being addressed at the local level. And I think in no meantime, you'll be reading from Ghana some of our local reviews from our various district assembly. So the NDPC, that is what we have been up to so far, producing a number of deliverables such as the voluntary national review. 2022 was our second opportunity that we got, which we're able to showcase what we have done. And there are many more things to actually address going forward. So we use this as opportunity to also, share the good news and also learn the various lessons that other countries are learning from or are even implementing. And we believe that this research that has been conducted, in as much as other countries will be able to read what our multi-level governance structure is with regards to the implementation of the SDGs. I know we'll also be able to learn more from other, pilot countries such as Argentina and co, learn whatever is also being done, the various challenges and the various gaps in order to be able to accelerate quickly to achieve the targets that we seem to be left behind given the situation that we have. So from Ghana, it's an opportunity to be on board, a learning opportunity to address various gaps and also to learn. And it's also an opportunity to also learn from us with the various interventions that we have, particularly at the local level. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Patience. And indeed, it's not only an opportunity for Ghana, and it's an opportunity for all of us to learn from your experience, from your path. Indeed, the history of UN Habitat in Ghana is just, I say, growing and growing. And indeed, much support will be going into the SDG localization and development of few VLRs in the coming months and years. And really, congratulations for your work. An inspiring process for the continent and the region, for sure, indeed. From Ghana, we pass to now Italy, to Andrea Innamorati, Senior Policy Analyst of the Ministry of Ecological Transition. Italy is, of course, again, another example in Europe. We have heard from you, Andrea, but also from your colleagues, Mara, in many occasions about the good articulation that is happening between strategies, plans at the municipal, regional, national level between ministries. It's very complex and it's quite impressive. So, Andrea, over to you to tell us more. And thank you again.
Thank you, Martino. Thank you, Martino, for giving me the floor, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation and for taking Italy as a pilot in this very interesting research. And thanks to those who have preceded me for their inspiring words. They are words that look at the work that we have done, but also look at the work that we have to do ahead. So very inspiring. It's a pleasure for us to take part into this meeting. And we're very curious to listen to the results of the research. Italy attaches great importance to effective multi-level governance and to the crucial role of subnational and local authorities in trying to achieve those transformational changes that the 2030 Agenda requires us to do. We believe that it is at local level that the vision, goals, targets of the 2030 Agenda meets the challenges that we have in our everyday life. And it is actually at the local level that by meeting these challenges, we can carve those solutions that take into account those specific contexts that we can only find at a local level. The pandemic first and the consequences of the Russia aggression against Ukraine have unraveled many of our weaknesses, have set us back in the implementation of many of the goals of the 2030 Agenda, and they have exposed our vulnerabilities. But they also have taught us a lot. They have taught us that the 2030 Agenda implementation makes our societies more resilient. So stronger and reaffirmed commitment to the agenda is extremely important exactly in these moments. They have taught us that if we work together in a coherent way, we are stronger. And by working together, I mean working together horizontally and vertically. At the EU level, we had an immediate response to the pandemic through the Recovery and Resilience Facility and the respective plans. And this gave an actual concrete example of how working together can give immediate and strong responses to a crisis. We have also learned that our recovery and resilience plans are developed at a national level, but they land at a local level. And here is where we are meeting the greatest challenges today. We have an immediate urge to respond to the crisis, and this immediate urge has to be made, the response to this immediate urge has to be made coherent with our long-term goals. And that's what we are trying to do at a national and local level in Italy. We have a recent Parliament resolution that asks the government through the ministries to demonstrate how our recovery and resilience plan and our cohesion funds are contributing to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Our Ministry for Finance is working on a monitoring framework in this sense, providing an ex post analysis of the impact of our policies on the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. But here at the Ministry for the Environment and Energy Security, we have been trying to work also on an ex ante approach to try to make our work more efficient especially in our relationship with regional and local authorities. Since 2017, we developed our National Sustainable Development Strategy, and we supported our regional and local authorities in their endeavor to develop regional and local plans in coherence with our national strategy to allow for these plans to support the implementation of our strategic goals. In other words, we tried to not leave alone those regional and local authorities in this endeavor. We developed ad hoc coordination mechanisms using the EU structural funds. We tried to provide technical and financial assistance to regional and local authorities and to build both capacities, but also to build their respective plans and to make those coherent with our National Sustainable Development Strategy. Today, we're dealing with additional plans, and the same objective is try to ensure the coherence between the immediate response to the COVID crisis and our long-term goals described in a national strategy. A few words on how we reflected this commitment in our recent voluntary national review. We presented this review in New York last summer. I had the honor to coordinate the preparation process, and both within the review, we had a special chapter dedicated to the role of regional and local authorities, as well as 12 voluntary local reviews that were accompanying our national review. And these reviews were made both by regions, by metropolitan cities, but also by regions uniting with metropolitan cities or regions uniting with other regions. So it was a very interesting cooperation process. And the reviews provide visibility to the work done at an international level, but most of all, they contaminated other actors at local and regional level. And that, I think, is the greatest achievement that we had with our voluntary national review. View it as a process and make sure that the process is not only looking at the international arena, but it's also trying to look within and contaminate further commitment. In preparing our VNR, we came across an extensive work ongoing at international level on empowering local and regional authorities, and Shipra talked a lot about it in our opening remarks, so I won't go over that, but we know the tremendous effort that UN Habitat is carrying out together with the United Nations Economic Commissions at a regional level. The UNEC region has a forum of mayors that has extensive work on this aspect. We as well, through our G20 presidency, have tried to support the local 2030 coalition in their endeavor. So in my closing part of my opening remarks, I would like to welcome this initiative. We think it's a very, very useful initiative. We think at this stage it's important to join efforts in trying to further support the work that's ongoing at the local and regional level. And that means that it's not that it's only up to the local and regional level to do the work, but it's something that we have to do all together. I think that's we are also bringing this forward within the European Union because it does not stop, at least for us, at the national level. It involves also a coherent approach also at a regional level within the EU. I will stop here and thank you again for the invitation, and we're looking forward to hear the results from the research. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thanks a lot for your extensive and inspiring words. It's a work that we need to do all together indeed. Italy's story, it's a story about, it's very interesting because you're talking about policy coherence, capacity building, planning, reporting, connection between VLRs and VNRs. This really demonstrates the complexity of the work that Italy is trying to do, to put together and to stitches all the pieces of this work for the SDGs, which is clearly a work that needs to be done horizontally across the different departments and dimensions, but also vertically across the different spheres of government. So congratulations to the work that you have been doing, and I'm pretty sure that the bases have been paved for very successful results in the future. I will thank all the opening speakers. I will get into a bit more of the details of the research for, let's say, we get now into the second part of the the workshop, where we get a bit more into the substance of the work. I see Patience. There is a question for you in the chat. Maybe you want to already reply in the chat in writing. Otherwise, we can take the questions at the end of the session if it's fine for all. I will continue by sharing my screen so that I can just share with you a very quick presentation about where do we stand with regards to this work on multi-level governance. Where do we want to go? I will not take too much of your time, because I think that the interesting part right now, it's really about the results. We want to hear about the results of this research, and I will leave it to the specialists here. We will have Arco as well as our knowledge partners to present that. I just want to make sure that we all understand why are we even here working on multi-level governance. No, it's not just because it's important. It's not just because some countries and cities are working on it, but because really there is a urgent need. Andrea, you mentioned the urgent need to address these challenges from a local perspectives, and this is reflected in many processes that have been taking place at the national level and resulted in some of these key agendas that our member states have subscribed. And you can see there is a convergence between the SDG localization and multi-level governance processes, many of which recognize both as key elements, components for the achievement of the 2030 agenda. On the left side, you see a bit, of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is some just snapshots of the most importance. The Decade of Action identifies local action as one of the key dimensions to delivering on the SDGs. The Common Agenda of the Secretary General identifies local authorities, cities, and also voluntary local reviews as key actors and processes. And Andrea, you mentioned the process of the G20, where SDG localization, territorial development, intermediary cities were put at the very center of the discussion, with also the launch of the G20 platform SDG localization. Same goes for multi-level governance. And here we go to the very beginning of our agenda, no? The goal 17 on the means of implementation that really looks at policy alignment and coherence across levels, across spheres of government, so putting multi-level governance from a policy perspective at the center of the implementation. The Common Agenda looks at it as well. The high-level meeting that also Shipra mentioned, among the 6 thematic areas of action identifying multi-level governance and localization, while the Ministerial Declaration of the HLPF clearly identifies the policy coherence at all levels as key for the achievement of the SDGs. So these are just some of the processes that we have inspired from to lead this work on multi-level governance. Now, how do we structure it? And today we are going to talk a bit mainly the two of the key pillars and components. So the partnership and the knowledge development, but we don't stop here. We want really this to be the first building block of something that will look into the future and that will bring us to work more into technical cooperation with our partner countries to develop the capacities of our partner cities and countries, and also, as Shipra mentioned again, bring all of these results into these global processes, discussion, debates, and advocacy processes in order to inspire certain decisions from the practices at the local level. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the results of months of partnerships and months of common work. And this is, of course, being inspired and supported by GIZ and BMZ. Their support has been essential to kickstart this process. And at the very beginning, we thought, okay, we need to start not from scratch, but we need to start from a very solid knowledge piece that will help us to clearly identify which are the gaps, which are the recommendations, and how we can really identify those dimensions that will bring us then to work into the practice at the local level. This partnership has been built then around some knowledge partners that have been working with ARCO, LSE Cities, the National Mandela School of Public Governance, UCLG, and also Brookings institutions. And this leads us to today with the launch of the multi-level governance for SDG localization research. Of course, there is a whole dimension of post-pandemic recovery, which is central to the research itself, as you know, as we advance as SDGs should be also the basis for recovery out of the pandemic. now, I will stop here a second and ask the team, Guy and Telman, to please put also the link in the chat. You will see the link to access the research, which is officially out. So as I go through it, please don't hesitate to click, download, have a look at it so that you can really go through the research itself. We have heard already from 3 of the pilot countries. We have, of course, Philippines and Jordan, in addition to Italy, Ghana, and Argentina. These have been treated really as living labs. Multi-level governance is kind of, it seems like we are talking for the first time about multi-level governance as something that has been, in the history of our governments, but we are at a turning point. As localization and local action is more and more central for the delivering of sustainable development and for development cooperation even, the attention towards the importance of local governments and local action has somehow made also the component of multi-level governance and national governance much more attentive. And this means that we are kind of at the beginning of a process that I'm sure will bring us to strengthen and enhance multi-level governance system. That's why we are talking about living labs, because the experience of these pilot countries, as Andrea, as Patience, and as Melissa has mentioned, is just at the beginning. I won't go really into the details of the research because I would like to give the floor and the time to our research team to go through it. Just this is kind of the table of contents, and I've circled which are the dimensions which for me are critical in this process, and specifically getting your attention into the action-oriented recommendation. We started from a really solid research approach, but what we aim to do, what we aim to produce is to something that is action-oriented, that can provide recommendation to both local as well as national governments to strengthen that coordination that is so essential to achieve the SDGs. Again, we have the researchers identified progress and gaps, the enabling factor, and these action-oriented recommendations. This whole scheme that probably Andrea and colleagues will go through is how we have analyzed all of the process. So there has been a deep search of analytical framework and the key dimensions for multi-level governance, vertical integration, horizontal integration, as stakeholders engagement being identified as the key dimensions for advancing effective multi-level governance systems. I will put here on the research and saying that there is a platform available. This is the first platform dedicated entirely to multi-level governance that you have, where you can find not only the research, but also globally the most relevant research tools on multi-level governance available. You have also a section on training, and also the fiches and case studies that build on the knowledge from the pilot countries and put it into dedicated fiches so that we can deep dive on the case studies that have been part of this research. You can look at also through your phone, but that's fine. What's next? I think this is important for us. Where do we go from here? Okay, the platform and the research are the partnership, the consortium, and all of the partners that are today connected is the building block, is the starting point. Within now to bring all of this knowledge that we have been able to create and to transmit it and to share it globally with our partners in order to make sure the multi-level governance becomes central in their practices and they get inspired from what has actually worked. This is just a little map of where we are hoping, where we are hoping to work, some of which are our key partners, some of which are going to work us directly into multi-level governance, others indirectly. Just for you to know that the approach that UN Habitat attaches to its work on SDG localization and urban planning really looks at multi-level governance as one of the key components. So it's like a cross-cutting approach to SDG implementation. Going a bit more into concrete, we are going to build a capacity building process on multi-level governance, which is going to link to all of the processes linked to SDG localization. Of course, we are reviewing the module 2 on SDG localization together with the colleagues of UCLG, which is going to be centered on urban planning. The Mayor's Academy, together with the colleagues of the regional commissions, is going to be replicated based on the experience of Asia Pacific in Africa and in the Arab countries. countries, probably, and looking into multi-level governance as one of the key components. And this is then strengthened with a set of online courses, mainly dedicated to voluntary worker reviews. But as we know, we cannot talk about voluntary worker reviews without talking today about their connection with the VNRs and also voluntary subnational reviews. Finally, and I will conclude here, what is expected and how are we going to work next years. Shipra has mentioned many of these processes. In all of these processes, our aim and the aim of UN Habitat is to put multi-level governance as a driver for SDG localization at the center of the debate. We are going to focus on action. So we know what multi-level governance is. We have the example Shipra mentioned. We have the example. We have the practices. Now we have to focus on action, on how do we advance these processes all over the world. One key focus is going to be then dedicated to VLR and VNRs, and we will hope to bring together more and more local and national governments to share their experiences on how they're connecting local and national reporting, because we have seen that the connection with VLRs and VNRs is a sign of a healthy coordination across levels. I will stop here. This is an overview of what we have done and what do we want to go. Please don't hesitate, if you have questions, put it in the chat. We go ahead with the panel and we keep the chat lively as possible. I will re-give myself the floor, and I will then now pass to actually the content and the center of this research, and pass the floor to Andrea. I see that Mario is also there. Good to see you, Mario, and all the team of ARCO that has been leading the research together with our knowledge partners. Over to you, colleagues, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Martino. Thank you, Shipra. Thank you, everybody. It's a very big pleasure to be with you and to present the research that the team has conducted during these months. Clearly, the main aim is to capture how we can accelerate to multi-level governance the SDG localization. Andato in cosa? No?
Yeah. Give us a second to share the screen properly.
So I will briefly introduce, then Andrea Ferranini and Andrea Agostinucci will go more in detail about our research. So,
what is that? Can you see the screen right now?
Yes, it is coming. It is coming indeed.
Yeah, it's coming from Telman. Thank you.
Okay, so accelerating the progress towards the localization. Towards the localization of SDGs is so relevant, and the idea of using multi-level governance is fundamental in order to foster the dialogue among different parts. The research has been conducted by our team that is composed by different people. Myself, Andrea Agostinucci, Matteo Belletti, Elisa Marrocco, Andrea Agostinucci. I would like to thank all the partners that have been already presented by Martino Miraglia and that you know very well, and so for their help and support. So, we started to think about, together with UN Habitat, about how to promote the localization of SDGs through effective multi-level governance systems. So rethinking, bringing new evidence and new ideas also about this possibility to accelerate through this multi-level governance. So we took some different type of research, and we contributed to a novel analytical framework, which is based on even previous studies. Then we started to analyze the trends that are at the core of multi-level governance drivers. And then we brought different case studies, the 5 case studies that have been already mentioned. So let's see what are the implications. We also applied a research methodology that started with analysis, then obviously with the state of the art, then we went through the systematization and understanding different trends and practices, good practices mainly, and then moved to the 5 case studies in the 5 countries, Argentina, Ghana, Italy, Jordan, and the Philippines. And I would like really to thanks the people that helped us in the research, and then rethinking and bringing a real world practice. And then we try to generalize the lessons that we learn through action-oriented guidance in order to accelerate how multi-level governance can help the localization of SDGs. So the idea is to bring a transformative agenda, universal, integrated, by making a strong dialogue and coordination among different levels of governance, and in order to respond in a coordinated way and an integrated way towards this objective. Then clearly there is a combination among different stakeholders, but also different capacities, resources, and actors, which are relevant at different levels, so also the local level, obviously, transforming the SDGs in a reality, which is so important for us and for our communities. So the capacity to create coordination and coherence and even cohesion among the different levels of the multi-level governance. So there is also the possibility to reinvigorate the leading role played by the UN agency, OECD, and the European Union, together with other local, regional governments, and also global association. So this is even more important nowadays after we have learned how experiences like the pandemic has somehow bring out problems that are related to the incapacity to use properly multi-level governance. And so this would be very relevant in order to be prepared for emergency actions and responses.
Okay, I'll continue from here on the principles. Just very briefly to mention, as was introduced, that this nexus between multi-level governance and SDG localization is really grounded on a set of previously existing consistent and complementary principles, as shown in the diagram. So obviously we have the 2030 Agenda principles that were already mentioned by Mario. We have the effective governance principles for sustainable development that are really at the core of this nexus in our understanding, and we have the multi-level governance principles as such. But, and it is important, it was mentioned by Shipra as well, these are also directly embraced by the new urban agenda, which represents an action-oriented framework to achieve the SDGs at the local level. What we have added, besides this preliminary introduction, is basically the analysis of the different dimensions of multi-level governance. So the concept of multi-level governance, we may say that today is used to describe the form of conducting politics and making public policies, being based on the engagement of a multiplicity of politically interdependent but otherwise interconnected actors. And in terms of dimensions, by reviewing lots of documents, reports, knowledge, papers, so the whole debate before us, and many of us here have contributed to this debate, it's clear that there are 3 dimensions of multi-level governance. One is vertical integration, which focuses really on the mechanism and arrangements for alignment and coordination across different governance levels. Then there is horizontal integration, which focuses most on structured mechanisms that enable interlinkages across policy sectors and domains. And then last but not the least, fundamental stakeholder engagement, which refers to those structured mechanisms that enable a full participation and cooperation among societal stakeholders. Obviously, these 3 dimensions are not separated one from another, as in the diagram, thanks Stanlon, as in the diagram, so as in this very preliminary sketch on the connection between the drivers, the factors, the practices, the outputs, and the outcomes, we can see that all these 3 dimensions contributed to an effective multi-level governance system for SDG localization. And then they are translated into different practices, especially practices in the policy cycle. So practices that may refer to the political leadership and commitment, practices that may refer to planning, practices that may refer to implementation of the SDGs, and practices that refer to monitoring and reporting. And from those practices, this can lead to specific outputs in terms of improved multi-level governance mechanisms and specific outcomes in terms, as we all aim to, improve functionalities for SDG localization. So this is our background from the research. And as stated, let me very briefly, because our previous speakers have already anticipated a lot of very relevant remarks, let me briefly highlight at least one or two qualifying elements from our 5 case studies. And then we go on the main overall general research findings. So in the case of Argentina, the main qualifying elements, there is a strong national political commitment for SDG implementation, which is reflected in the introduction, first of all, of an interministerial, intersectoral approach based on the different relevant organisms from the national public administration. But this has also led, and that was clearly also in the stronger efforts in the wonderful experience of Córdoba, this has led to the introduction of a comprehensive governance framework for SDG localization that has been made operational in particular and mostly at the intermediate level, so the provincial level. And this is a main qualifying elements that could provide a very relevant lessons learned also for other countries. In the case of Ghana, this again was anticipated in the previous speech. Ghana is taking advantage of its decentralized planning system to introduce a well-structured multi-level governance architecture in support to SDG localization. So all governing bodies at different levels are requested to ensure provisions on the different dimensions of the SDGs. So this is pushing for a good degree of alignment and coherence of policies, plans, and budgets for the SDGs in the country. In the case of Italy, and again, that was mentioned before, there is a very strong relevance and centrality of the national sustainable development strategy, and all the opportunities for SDG localization, for multi-level governance for SDG localization are formally enshrined in the national law, which is recommending and allowing, through the support of the ministry, to regional and local authorities, policy departments, societal actors, to take part into the design, the implementation, the revision of the national strategies, but also of their regional, metropolitan, and city strategies for sustainable development. In the case of Jordan, here again, the governance framework for SDG localization is truly shaped by a series of decentralization reforms implemented in the recent years. And by building on these reforms, the national and local authorities, policy departments, and societal actors are involved in the strategic design, planning, implementation, and review of the SDG localization strategy. And then, as a last example, in the case of the Philippines, here it is apparent the existence of a very dense and structured system, including a comprehensive set of mandatory regulations, tools, and incentive measures from the national governments to the action of local governments, which is leading then to variable outcomes depending on the level of governments. So these are just a few of the qualifying elements. Obviously, in the world research, in the country fiches, that you have many more examples and also good practices, but also some of the elements of further improvement in the countries. But by combining, and I leave the floor to my colleague Andrea, by combining what has come out from the countries and what has been analyzed in previous studies and also in another wide set of practices across the world, it's clear that we have progresses and gaps in multi-level governance dimensions. Andrea.
Thank you, Andrea. Good afternoon, everyone. I will go on looking a bit more specifically on progress and gaps related to the 3 core dimensions of multi-level governance as part of the findings, indeed, and conclusions of our research. Let me start with some general considerations. 2030 agenda, definitely more and more serving as a common language, I would say, in framework for policy dialogue and for joint action on sustainable development. Related to these is a growing recognition of the role of MLG system for SDGs as drivers in particular of policy coherence and integration and effective action of local governments for SDGs localization. Related to these, we found really a wealth of practices and institutional arrangements, still a partial evidence, I would say, of fully functioning and mainstream coordination mechanisms across levels and policy domains. We also found different degrees and forms of political commitment, ranging from full national leadership to more locally driven efforts, and somewhere a risk of a top-down approach, which happens to limit, I would say, local ownership initiative and real interaction across levels and actors. It is therefore important to try and balance, to possible extent, national orientation and coordination functions with the preservation of local autonomy, which is an important and essential, I would say, ingredient of effective localization processes. Now looking at vertical integration a bit more specifically, there is a critical gap here, applying in particular at municipal level in the relation between national and local level, despite, as Andrea was saying, despite a rather dense coordination structure that we found in many countries, consistent of new or adapted spaces and mechanisms for dialogue and coordination across levels, but not yet leading to a sufficiently systematic and structured role and engagement of local governments in national policy making, implementation and monitoring processes. And this gives us a rather partial impact of multi-level governance on power imbalances and asymmetries at different levels. On the other hand, we notice an important, very important role of local and regional governments associations in advocating for and specifically channeling their members' access and participation to national policy debate, as well as to important peer-to-peer knowledge exchange dynamics. There is the significant advances in aligning planning systems at different levels. More and more local and regional governments are aligning their strategies and plans to the SDGs. However, there is a certain disconnection with implementation frameworks in terms of allocation of resources, prioritization of investment, synchronization of function and mandates in particular. Another important element associated to vertical integration, the vertical alignment of policies and plans is only partly reflected and accompanied, I would say, by appropriate budgeting and financing mechanisms that are supposed to complement local capacities for SDGs localization that are often rather partial and limited. We highlighted some key factors for enhancing the alignment of policy priorities and the consequent operationalization of support for SDGs localization, and this includes the important, the crucial role of intermediate governance layers, as for example, a prominent example from Argentina, catalyzing and harmonizing support at the intersection, I would say, of national and municipal and local levels, the important role of international organization in alliance with local and regional governments associations, strengthening and backing local governments' capacity. Here again, the obvious example of great importance and relevance of UN Habitat partnering with UCLG, and the collaboration and partnership at subnational levels, including, for example, territorial decentralized cooperation mechanisms that can enable further dialogue, coordination, and synergies. Looking at horizontal integration, we found a wealth again of whole of government coordination mechanisms implemented at different levels to integrate the SDGs transversally in policymaking and programming, addressing policy divergences, enabling positive interactions, synergies, and complementarity across policy domains. And this is applied through the diffusion, the growing diffusion of high-level coordination mechanisms for policy coherence, allowing the integration of SDGs across central agencies like ministries, other sectoral institutions and bodies. Normally, these mechanisms are located at the center of government or in a lead line ministry or department of the state. And obviously, of equal importance, regions and cities piloting innovative practices to implement the SDGs holistically, enhancing and through horizontal integration. And this includes, as examples, capacity building, staff incentives and mobility schemes, use of digital technologies, citizen scrutiny and participation, very importantly, SDGs budgeting tools, pooling funds, providing financial incentives for policy and programs integration and the like. And finally, local governments, networks and alliances, very important to create horizontal synergies and mobilize further external support. We've identified some key issues or challenging issues, I would say, for horizontal integration. have to do, for example, with the mandate of coordinating bodies and mechanisms. This has to do with their power and enforcement capacity, which is often rather partial and still limited. The balance between the concentrated and decentralized framework, also in many cases not fully realized and achieved, and often partially unclear assignment of implementation responsibility and related resources and capacities of different actors, authorities, and organizations involved at different levels. The third dimension, stakeholder engagement. Our analysis has certainly confirmed the relevance and the growing evidence of national and local governments engaging proactively with different stakeholders through a whole of society approach that ensures in turn a comprehensive perspective and helps building collective awareness and ownership on SDGs. There's a great variety of stakeholder engagement mechanisms. This applies in terms of types and categories of stakeholders, of course, levels of government, stages of the policy cycle, level of initiative, leadership, and control, mostly on the government side, or rather driven by non-state actors and civil society, and mandate and power, with the prevailing focus either on decision-making aspects or on consultative and advisory functions. What are the benefits and costs of stakeholder engagement? In short, certainly it is crucial to mobilize support to allow the sharing of competence and resources and activating synergies on common concrete problems applying at a local level, but it also takes time and resources to manage views and interests that are at times different and competing, and in the presence, again, often of a lack of a specific comprehensive vision and capacity to address the complexity of multiple and cross-sectorial linkages, as many actors tend to look at their specific sphere of interest and activity, of course. A couple of words on monitoring and reporting is not pointed as a dimension of multi-level governance, but we believe it is a crucial transversal component of effective and comprehensive multi-level governance systems. And this is where substantive progress is being observed on MLG for SDGs. SDGs monitoring and reporting frameworks at different levels, VNR, VSR, VLR, are mostly and increasingly incorporating stakeholders' engagement and horizontal integration principle, as it was mentioned already. In particular, localized SDGs monitoring and reporting systems include SDGs targets and indicators adapted to local realities, and broad-based participation processes as basis, as very important and crucial basis for policy learning, empowerment, accountability, and scale is what we call the value and importance of the process beyond its immediate outputs. And this applies perfectly to the VLR exercises, the VLR movement that is booming and significantly adding to the quality and scope of the process. Along these lines, it has been contributing to reinforce vertical integration, horizontal integration, and stakeholder engagement, and therefore the nature of MLG as a comprehensive and integrated dynamic. An element of weakness or constraint, the prevailing absence of locally disaggregated indicators, which obviously limits the potential to analyze SDGs localization progress and requires no doubt stronger efforts in building local data system through multi-level collaboration. To conclude on some challenges and potential for improvement, the governance gap, as I've already introduced, still partial representation and involvement of local governments in national policy debate and policy making, and still partial, although promising, advances in horizontal and vertical integration, which happen to limit the potential for connecting SDGs action across levels of government. It is crucial, therefore, to avoid that, this is something that we found somewhere in the different examples, that the wealth of policies, at times very relevant and innovative practices for SDGs localizations, piloted by cities and regions, remain episodic and confined to the local spheres. On the contrary, it is crucial to use them to enhance scope for synergies, for complementarities and scale in addressing problems that are more and more interconnected as part of the SDGs. And then exploit policy learning opportunities, another key element, feeding and mainstreaming innovative local practices into comprehensive national policy frameworks. Another key issue, SDGs, despite efforts are still prevailingly approached thematically with a focus on sectoral targets and a bit less on functional alignment and integration, the famous who does what and how, as we quoted in our study, in terms of mandates, attribution, resources and capacity at different levels and with different actors involved. There is therefore a needed margin to avoid overlappings, to limit duplications and to enhance multiple synergies through strengthened vertical and horizontal integration. And then finally, again, possibly in the wake of this work that we did, the need and the potential and the interest, I think, for further work in elaborating a framework for analysis and assessment of effective multi-level governance systems, which requires, of course, the establishment and the careful identification and elaboration of qualitative and quantitative proxies and indicators to assess specifically the impact of multi-level governance dynamics on improved functionalities, as we call it in the study for SDGs localization. Thank you so much. Back to you, Andrea, I guess, for concluding.
Yeah, let me quickly conclude. Just in terms of action-oriented recommendations and follow-up, obviously the whole research report provides many more insight, but very quickly on the three main dimensions. Probably nothing that new for us, but it's important to spread the voice on these recommendations. So first, officially integrating local and regional governments into national coordination mechanisms and reporting processes is something that especially USCLG is really opening the way and pushing all of us in all our countries to go in this direction. Using the SDGs as a framework to align policy priorities, incentives, objectives across the different levels within obviously the respect of subsidiarity principles and local autonomy. This seems fundamental, as well as investing, what mentioned by Andrea a few seconds ago, investing in a collection and elaboration of new and disaggregated data at the local level is a fundamental recommendation for our way ahead towards SDG localization. And last but not the least on this, promoting enabling environments for subnational reporting, that was mentioned, for instance, in the case of Italy, by connecting VLRs, VSRs, and local governments to the VNR processes. In terms of horizontal integration, here again, what we may recommend out of the wide and in-depth analysis of trends, practices all around the world is extending government role to an interministerial or interdepartmental body in a whole of government approach. So these are concepts that need to be made operational by really identifying responsible bodies that are able to overcome a silo thinking and links together the different departments, the different ministries towards SDG localization. In this sense, enhancing horizontal cooperation at different levels of governance, it's fundamental, and this can also be strongly led by the role of local and regional government associations committed to SDG localization. And here we think that it's important to directly engage with, to directly talk and to increase the capacities in public administrations to adequately address the principles integrated nature of the SDGs, again, avoiding a separated vision for each of the SDGs, but really to work in a new cross-disciplinary and experimental ways within the public administrations. In terms of stakeholder engagement, here again, a lot of innovative efforts have already paved the way in many countries. So it's clear that we should enable in all places a real participation by all societal actors to inform and influence sustainable development strategies in all phases. And it's apparent that there is a wide array of different participatory methods and tools that can be adapted to different contexts. But also, and here again, the great experience of VLRs, VSRs, VNRs are illustrative of the way that we should enable the use of reviews and monitoring reports by all societal actors for their own analysis, for communication, but also to keep accountable local and regional governments, national governments, and to influence decision-making processes. So to conclude, let's just share a few elements of follow-up by all of us as knowledge partners, as direct implementing actors in the countries. So these multi-level governance guidance elements can pave the way and create a solid base to enhance societal commitment, which is fundamental, not only government commitment, societal commitment by all actors, institution building, capacity building for SDG implementation. On our side, collectively, as a community of practice, as a community of knowledge, future global research may be required to continue with an updated systematization of good practices. This is fundamental to let emerge the innovativeness of our own places and experiences, the analysis of a wider array of case studies and living labs, so going beyond our very first 5 living labs that were mentioned before. But we need also in terms of global research to design a robust evaluation of these relevant experiences through an appropriate theory of change, and to identify a set of indicators to define a strong monitoring system on multi-level governance for SDG localization. So we truly believe, and we conclude, that by providing local and national governments with cutting-edge knowledge, practical organizations on multi-level governance to implement SDGs in all places, we need to combine evidence, insights, ideas from all global knowledge partners, from countries, regions, and cities across the world. So it's great that we are here today, and as presented by Martino before, we will be here in the future together to continue on this work and this debate. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Andrea. Congratulations to everyone. Huge piece of work. I not even tried to start to recap what all of the points that have been shared, but I want to indeed stress some of the points that you have been closing with, in the sense what is coming forward. All of that you have been hearing from the colleagues of ARCO is well described also in the research. The stress and the focus is on the last 2 chapters, really, which summarize the main findings and the key recommendations for strengthening multi-level governance. And these are, the building blocks from where we want to start from. The horizontal integration, vertical integration, and stakeholders engagement are the dimensions that we are going to stress our work on, and trying to make the best out of these recommendations to bring them to life. Because these are really based on the practical experiences of the pilot countries, but also on the experiences of all the countries and cities from all over the globe. As I don't want to take more of the time in speaking, and we have some knowledge partners that have been working with us very closely, I will pass the floor to Tony Pipa from Brookings Institution, Senior Fellow, to maybe share some of his reflections out of what he just heard, as you have been already being part of this process before. Tony, word is yours. I'm afraid we cannot hear you, Tony. I see that you are unmuted, but maybe you have to select the proper microphone in Teams.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for inviting my participation both today and in the project. I really think it's an important contribution as the way in which you've laid out the dimensions of multilateral governance systems with the vertical integration, the horizontal integration, and the stakeholder engagement. I'm going to be quick, but I think there are just 3 points that I would like to make as we think about what these coordination mechanisms need to look like, both to unleash progress at the local level as well as progress at the provincial and the national level as well. One, I think it's really important that this framework has started from the perspective of local governments itself, and really provides the space and the opportunity to take that engagement and leadership seriously. We like to say that local governments have been on the front lines of issues that are reflected in the SDGs, and usually when we say that, we mean things like the pandemic, and it's local governments that were immediately brought into action with immediate response to those things. But I also think it's important that we continue to recognize that local governments have really been at the forefront of innovation, of practical application of the SDGs. The interdependencies across the SDGs, the trade-offs that come with those interdependencies, thinking of policy interventions that can advance things on multiple dimensions at once. we've really seen that it's local governments that have been on the forefront of creating opportunities and policy interventions that work in that regard. And I think that's where we want to maximize both what they're doing, but also take the lessons from that for other levels of governance as well and be able to apply. I know, having sat in the chair at the United Nations leading our delegation for the US on the SDGs, we were thinking primarily from a national government point of view, but it's very difficult for national governments in the way in which they're organized to practically come up with those policy interventions. And I think there's a lot to be said for the discourse that can happen in terms of exchange, knowledge, practicality amongst the different levels of governance. So the second point I want to make is, as we seek that greater alignment amongst multi-levels of governance, we don't want to lose the innovation. So I think that's what's very interesting about the report and about the information that you put forward, is to get that balance correctly, to be able to scale up and unleash greater impact, while at the same time really providing the space for government at all levels to continue to innovate. We don't want it to get into a reporting exercise. Let's remember that voluntary local reviews were an innovation in and of themselves, right? They were not part of the follow-up and review process that we put in the resolution for the SDGs. And so we want to continue to provide space for that kind of innovation going forward, while using the SDGs as that common language and as that common framework that can really tie the different levels of governance together. And I think that leads to the third point I want to make, is that as we develop products and as we develop policy interventions, we have to recognize that the process is sometimes as important as the final product. And so that process and that dialogue between among national governments, provincial or state governments, local governments, that is where the learning, that is where the innovation, and that is where the ways forward come out of that discourse. And so providing the framework that you provided to kind of create more formal as well as more methodical ways to enhance that discourse and unleash that innovation, I think is a real contribution here. So I'll leave my remarks there. Thanks very much. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to run to another meeting, but I really look forward to continued engagement on this.
Tony, thanks a lot. Few points, and one that I would like to stress, that's my personal opinion. The process is probably even more important than the product, specifically when it comes to multi-level governance, with the dialogue, the trust that needs to be created across actors, across levels. It's definitely the key for the multi-level governance system to function. Of course, it needs to be integrated into concrete mechanisms and systems, but that kind of non-informal process that leads to the creation of these projects and mechanisms is definitely the key. Philip, as LSE cities together with UCLG, governance under emergency situation, the issue of multi-level governance, something that you have been looking very closely with specifically in the past couple of years of crisis. And of course, your expertise was central for strengthening this research. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Martino. And I do want to come back, and maybe Anara will comment on this as well, on our own work on multi-level emergency governance. But let me first reflect on what I picked up in your report and also today. And first of all, with Shipra open us up, saying, this is about as much around advancing a discussion as it is about action, and your real being plugged into the practices that already happen, I think, is a very strong component of the initiative, and therefore also an element of the report. There are a few just general issues which this effort reminds us of. We are all agreeing that governance reform is often an important precondition for implementing a policy agenda. In this case, it's the SDGs. there is a question then around the actual speed of change of certainly governance reforms, which take an enormous amount of energy and time prior to implementing something. And you reminded us that also next year we are halfway through the 2030 agenda. So there is a real question about how realistic do we have to be that any government are actually engaging with reforms dedicated to the needs of the SDGs specifically. If they're emergencies, that's a different story, but in relation to the SDGs. There's also the issue that we are dealing with this enormously long causal chain between multi-level governance arrangements, then policy capacities, and ultimately policy outcomes. And it's very hard with the practices and empirical insights we have to ultimately conclude this is what exactly delivers that. History can tell to a degree as a part of an experiment, but predictive in very different contexts is very hard to say, okay, you just need to do that, and then you'll be much better equipped to do this. And then a final sort of more generic observation around the language we are using. It is, of course, really only in communities like this one where we actually understand what we're talking about, regardless of the reality, how important every single SDG is. But go to even the Guardian website, which I did while we were talking, and Google for SDG localization. It has never been talked about, even in the Guardian, right? And this should tell us something. There's something about finding language to convince also the general public that some of these ideas really matter and we need to work on it. Now, a few traditional problems of multi-level governance, in some ways you refer to or you sort of indirectly address. We do continue having a strong focus on the formal levels of government. While that matters, we also know, and your stakeholders alludes to this, but it's beyond that. There are lots of informal elements of multi-level governance which we need to understand better. The construction of scale in governance more generally is probably more political than technocratic. And in some ways in your report and presentation, you also shy away from discussing the redistribution of power, which we actually consider under the emergency situation as a fundamental pillar of multi-level governance, the assignment of different administrative, fiscal, and political powers to different levels, and not just the coordination of an existing status quo. And I'd be curious to understand how you would respond to that. And then, of course, the conflict of operating with very different time horizons. The good thing is you were alluding to many new approaches and overcoming barriers. I thought using the 2030 agenda itself with its sort of common language is, of course, an integrating force. The ideas that come out of Argentina with the intermediate governance layer is equally important. Let me now just conclude on multi-level emergency governance, the work we have been doing with UCLG and with Metropolis, sorry. And in this case, we have really taken head-on the issue of initially focusing on the rationale of how power is being redistributed as a result of recognizing a core and urgent agenda. And that rationale, I think we need to understand much better. Under conditions of emergencies, you want to maybe stabilize the core, enable radical intervention, want to have fast and effective decision-making, maybe more equitable emergency responses, and crucially enable, we just heard it from Tony, enable experimentation. And then you get into questions of coordination. And in our case, under these complex emergencies, we had a particular focus on how do we ensure that local governments offer strategic input, report back to national governments, but also input into what they are actually deciding on in terms of their strategic response to emergencies, or in your case, their strategic response to the SDGs. And for that, you need new institutions. And that then leads to the second question of what is the role of local government associations in providing that inverse input, the reporting upwards. I leave it at this, but congratulations, really interesting and glad we were able to contribute.
Philip, as usual, very inspiring words. I have the feeling we could stay over for a couple of hours just debating about all of these points, no? And starting from the Guardian, not mentioning SDG localization and this language that indeed it's so difficult sometimes to transmit. I remember, I'm just take 2 minutes to say this anecdote. I remember I was in Italy, actually, in a small municipality in Umbria, trying to talk about territorial approach to sustainable development, but because this needs to be overconnected. And guys, I'm sorry, I need to build a road. You see, we have sometimes this kind of approach which is very much technical, and we are so difficult to. We face difficulties to communicate, and indeed, not only in SDG with regards to SDG localization, but also the issue of multi-level governance. It's something that that needs to be communicated much better. I won't build on all of these points, the ones that you made. I know that maybe Arco and the colleagues of Andrea might want to respond to a few of the things that you might have shared, but I'll leave it maybe for the closure after all respondents have had the chance to speak. And this will bring me to Ainara Fernandez, a research officer of UCLG. Ainara, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Martino, and hello, everybody. I also apologize for my voice. I wish that I could blame it on football, but in my case, it was the Barcelona flu that took me down. But I'm recovering now, and I'm very happy that it allowed me to be here with you, because it has been a really inspiring conversation. And I want to take it from where Philip left it. And I want to say that for us at United Cities and Local Governments, actually, multi-level governance is simply a fundamental part of our work. And the reason for this is that multi-level governance is implicitly a political process. And I was hearing the conversation about how to make our multi-level governance systems better for the SDG localization. And I was wondering to myself, is it even possible to achieve this perfect multi-level governance system? And I don't think so. I think that one of the key lessons for us is that it is in the evolution of these multi-level governance systems where we can extract the lessons that allow us to evolve even further. Because we know that currently we're facing complex and interconnected emergencies that are urging local and regional governments to step up and to really act to meet the daily challenges faced by their populations. But unfortunately, we also know that things are only going to get more complicated. So it's not only that we need to be having these discussions about how to make our multi-level governance systems more effective, is that we need to be having these discussions now in an urgent and serious way, because we're going to be needing even better multi-level governance systems than the ones that we're aspiring for right now. And I really wanted to congratulate the team that's been steering the research process, and for the output and for the process as well. And we were speaking about the Agenda 2030 as being a common language, and this has come up a huge number of times throughout the whole conversation. And I was thinking to myself, yes, sometimes you have a common language, but it's in the writing of some certain books where this common language is actually consolidated and it becomes a language that's actually used. And okay, I agree with Philip that we may need to be able to translate this book into other languages. But I think that this piece of research in particular is one of those books. And I wanted to highlight three key reasons why I think that this research is important and why it is important for us as UCLG. And I don't want to take very long because I know that we're already over time. But firstly, I want to highlight how it's departing from a robust analysis of the state of the art of research knowledge that has been produced around how multi-level governance systems are not only necessary for the implementation of the SDGs, but also critical for the acceleration of the implementation of the SDGs. And it departs from this very complex and robust analysis. And it arrives at a very clear-cut analytical framework, which I think is very useful because it's very easy to relate to. And it allows to expand itself, to apply it to different contexts. We saw it with the pilot countries, and we saw it with different experiences. And it allows us to keep on building this knowledge that we're co-creating together. Secondly, I wanted to share how I think that it's really good to see how this research brings to the fore the variety of experiences that are emerging from different countries from around the world. As of now, we're working with pilots but we're already seeing in your roadmap how we can take this work forward in different regions coming up, but then also in the variety of dimensions that make up multi-level governance. And I think that this is super nice because it allows to see how particular elements that relate to these particular dimensions are particularly interesting. So for instance, when it comes to stakeholder engagement, the fact that it was mentioned a couple of times already in this discussion, but in the report you can also see it, how it may be a key to ensuring policy continuity and the continuity of mechanisms. This is not an obvious conclusion. And I think that this research is very nice because it allows to draw these kinds of not obvious conclusions for the 3 dimensions of multi-level governance. And I think this is actually a step forward, in allowing all of us to move forward and beyond the classical recommendations. And this brings me to the third and last point that I wanted to make, which is that precisely because the recommendations are action-oriented, that it allows us to see the gaps in how these recommendations can be implemented and how they can actually push the frontier of what is being done. So for instance, when we're talking about locally disaggregated indicators, the fact that this concrete point is addressed for every dimension of multi-level governance can take us to say, okay, so what's the next step? Oh, okay, now, have we talked about prioritization processes, for example? How can these prioritization processes relate to planning or to stakeholder engagement or vertical or horizontal integration? So I think that this is actually something that's very powerful. It's a tool that can be used. You can approach it with the 2 hands. And I think that this is something super nice. And as I said in the beginning, this is simply a fundamental piece of work for us at UCLG, as your partners in crime, you and Habitat, in order to advance the work that we're doing on SDG localization, also to advance other frontiers of work, like the Emergency Governance Initiative that Philip was introducing and that you were also introducing, Martino, with our colleagues from Metropolis, but in general, just to advance the work of the Global Association of Local and Regional Governments, to take the voices of local and regional governments, to amplify them, and to make sure that they're actually taken into consideration as political voices, not only as voices related to the implementation of the SDGs, but as political voices that are necessary and that have knowledge and that have expertise that are necessary for the implementation of the SDGs. So I'm just going to leave it there. I promised that I was going to be brief. I wasn't brief in the end. But again, colleagues, thank you very much and congrats on this piece of work. We're looking forward to taking it forward.
Thanks a lot, Ainara. It's a pleasure of being a partner in crime of yours and to continue this work together. I think just to stress the key role of the national, regional, and global association of local regional governments, that also thanks to the the driving force of UCLG, that we have increased their relevance vis-a-vis specifically national governments in the past years. So not only at the national level but also the global level, the mayors being represented, for example, in the General Assembly during the high-level meeting for the review of the new urban agenda. That's something that we need to celebrate. The executive board of UN Habitat just held a few weeks ago, hosted the mayors, representatives defining and explaining their action on local governments as well, on reflecting on multi-level governance. This is the power of the associations, and that is why it is critical that your work is fully integrated at the national level in pushing this agenda forward. Thank you, Ainara. Colleagues, we came to an end of this session, of this presentation that has been, we have gone a bit over time as usual, I would say, but it's also good to have this kind of debates, which are kind of unique opportunities to advance these reflections of all together. Andrea, yes, sorry, I didn't give you back the floor, please.
To Mario.
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank Tony, Philip, and Ainara for their comments, and you all, Shipra, you. The point is that after so many years that I am working on this issue, I found this work that we conducted with your help to create some basis, as Ainara was saying, to build further understanding, because here is not just a question of understanding vertical and horizontal, but how institutions may enable and foster these changes, how we can create an empowered learning system that is going somehow to augment these changes. And this is what has been done. Thanks also to the work of other people. But nowadays, I feel the same that Ainara was feeling, that there is really something to build. And this is why now I agree also with Philip. We can try also to dialogue more outside, because now there are some foundations, and we can improve what we have done so far by understanding better how different elements do dialogue and how to make this dialogue better. And the fact that we have different cases, the fact that we know better what's going on in different countries can help us to be even more creative in some circumstances in other countries, maybe where the changes, the institutional changes, the commitment of policymakers at different level has not been so good. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mario, for your reflections. And colleagues, I'll go back to the closing of the session. It has been a pleasure. I won't wrap up what we have been debating and trying to say today, because there is a lot eventually to say. What I will try to say is this is just a beginning. And so you will hear more about the topic, you will hear more about us, about the partners, the consortium and the pilot countries. A big thanks to the colleagues of GIZ and BMZ for the support, to all the knowledge partners, UCLG, ARCO, LSECTs, Brookings, and the Nelson Mandela School for Public Governance, and specifically to, again, our pilot countries and cities for their availability. This is the building block for something that we can indeed start all together building for the future. Before closing, maybe I'm not sure if after 2 hours of discussion you want to turn on your camera, but it would be interesting and nice if you could turn on the cameras, colleagues. I know that you have to be allowed to do so, or if the team can turn on your cameras like this disruptively without letting you know. I don't know. I hope not. Please don't be in your underwear. Just to take a picture, mainly the speakers and presenters, if you can turn on your cameras. Otherwise, it's also fine like this. Huh? No pressure. Good. Okay, colleagues. Thanks a lot. Good to see you all. Good to see you, Andrea, from the car.
Take care.
Colleagues.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good break
Bye
to all of
bye.
you.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
colleagues. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.